Emily was the kind of girl who could walk into a room and leave without anyone ever remembering she was there. She was quiet, polite, and soft-spoken, the type of child who always followed rules, finished homework early, and avoided unnecessary attention. She did not dress in loud colors, she did not speak loudly, and she did not try to impress anyone. Because of that, most people assumed she had nothing special to offer. Her school was large and full of talented children. Many of them showed confidence, sometimes even arrogance. They spoke loudly about their achievements, exaggerated their skills, and performed in music competitions just to hear applause. Teachers loved students who stood in the spotlight, who smiled brightly, who could charm an audience without effort. Emily was not one of those students. She blended into the background as if she were part of the furniture. Yet behind her quiet personality, Emily carried a secret love: music. She had discovered the piano when she was only 6 years old, a small dusty keyboard placed in her grandmother's living room. Nobody taught her how to play. She simply pressed one key, then another, and slowly realized that pressing keys in different ways created sounds that made her heart feel soft and alive. It became her private world, a place where she never felt judged, rushed, or misunderstood. When she started school, she never bragged about her skill. She did not tell teachers she practiced every day, and she never asked to perform in class. She was afraid of people laughing at her mistakes. She feared being seen because being seen meant being judged. So she played only at home, behind closed doors where nobody could hear her. Her parents worked long hours, so they rarely noticed how much she practiced. But her grandmother, who lived with them, often sat quietly in the room, pretending to read while secretly listening. She saw how Emily's fingers moved naturally and how music came to her without effort. She believed Emily had talent, but she also knew the girl lacked confidence. Sometimes she wanted to tell Emily to show her gift to the world, but she worried pushing her might break her fragile spirit. At school, Emily was surrounded by children who liked competition. Music class was full of students who fought for attention and praise. Many of them took private lessons, entered music contests, and loudly talked about their certificates and awards. Emily did not have any certificates. She had never competed. She only had passion, which no one could see. Teachers, too, assumed she was average. They encouraged students who performed loudly and confidently. No teacher ever asked Emily if she played an instrument. They believed her silence meant lack of ability. Sometimes, during music class, she would sit at the back and listen to others play the piano with exaggerated movements, trying to impress. She would quietly notice when someone played the wrong rhythm or missed a note. She knew she could play better, but she never said a word. She simply watched, clapped politely, and left the room unnoticed, just as she always did. Her classmates found her strange. They did not dislike her, but they did not understand her either. They thought she was too shy, too plain, too boring to have any hidden talent. Some even believed she had no dreams at all. Emily heard their whispers sometimes. She knew she did not fit in, but she never tried to change herself to please them. Every day after school, while others socialized, she went straight home and practiced for hours. She played old classical pieces she found online, sometimes struggling, sometimes smiling when the music finally sounded right. She would repeat a difficult section again and again until her fingers ached. But she never complained because playing did not feel like work, it felt like breathing. She dreamed of performing one day, not for applause, but to share the emotions she felt when she played. But then fear would take over. She imagined standing on stage, hands shaking, people staring at her, waiting for perfection. She imagined the embarrassment of failure, the sound of laughter if she made a mistake. Those thoughts scared her so much that she decided it was better to remain invisible than to risk humiliation. Her grandmother, however, continued to encourage her in gentle ways. "You have a gift, Emily," she would say. "One day the world will hear you." Emily always smiled and nodded, but inside she never believed it. She thought gifts belonged to people who were confident, loud, and fearless. She did not see herself as someone special. Years passed like this, school days full of silence and music nights full of passion. Emily remained unnoticed. She walked softly, spoke softly, lived softly. But every time she sat at a piano, she transformed. Her face relaxed, her posture straightened, and her fingers moved with a grace that no one would believe came from the shy girl who sat alone during lunch. She didn't know it yet, but her quiet dedication was slowly shaping her into someone extraordinary. She thought she was invisible, but she was only waiting for a moment that would push her out of the shadows and into the light, not because she wanted attention, but because she had something powerful inside her that deserved to be heard. And even though no one around her realized it, Emily was becoming a musician, not just through skill, but through heart, discipline, and a love so strong that even silence could not hide it forever. The announcement of the annual classical concert arrived on a sunny Monday morning, catching every student's attention except Emily's. She sat at her desk, quietly finishing her notes, when the music teacher walked into class with a bright smile and a stack of colorful flyers. Every year, the concert was the biggest event in the school, and students treated it like an opportunity to prove who was the most talented, the most confident, and the most admired. The teacher passed out the flyers, and the room instantly filled with excited voices. Students began planning costumes, song choices, and performances before even reading the rules. Some bragged loudly about past wins, reminding everyone of how they had amazed the audience last year. They talked about standing ovations, bouquets of flowers, and the way teachers praised them afterward. For many, the concert was not about music, it was about attention. Emily watched quietly. She silently folded the flyer and placed it inside her notebook, pretending it was just another school event. But inside, her heart raced a little. She thought about performing just for a moment, then forced the idea away. She reminded herself she wasn't confident enough. She pictured herself freezing on stage, making mistakes, hearing laughter, and feeling her face burn with shame. That mental image made her stomach twist, but even though she refused to admit it, she wanted it. She wanted to perform more than anything. She wanted to show the beauty she felt when she played, to share it with people who thought she was nobody. Still, fear was stronger than desire, so she remained silent. The names of selected performers would be announced the following week. The list was usually predictable: students who were loud, talented, and always in the spotlight. Emily already knew who would be on it, and she knew her name wouldn't be there. After all, the teachers barely remembered she existed. At home that evening, Emily sat at the piano playing softly. Her grandmother listened, as always, from her chair. She could see that something was different in Emily's music. There was longing in it. It sounded like someone who wanted to be heard but didn't know how to speak. "You're thinking about that concert, aren't you?" her grandmother asked gently. Emily didn't answer, but her fingers slowed. She stared at the keys and whispered, "Everyone there is so good." Her grandmother gave a small smile. "Everyone there is loud," she corrected. "Loud is not always good." Emily looked up. She had never thought of it that way. She believed talent belonged to those who were fearless enough to show it. Her grandmother continued, "You don't have to be fearless, you just have to be brave once. One small moment is enough." But Emily shook her head. The thought of standing under bright lights with hundreds of eyes staring terrified her. "I don't think I can do it," she murmured. "You don't need to think you can," her grandmother replied. "You just need to try." Emily didn't respond. She returned to playing, using music to silence thoughts she wasn't ready to face. The next week at school, the hallways buzzed with excitement. Students talked about their positions in the concert like celebrities. Some practiced loudly in the music room, showing off every time someone walked by. Teachers encouraged them, praising their confidence and stage presence. Emily walked past the music room once and heard a student performing a piano piece. He played loudly and dramatically, hitting keys with force. Students applauded enthusiastically, even though he rushed the tempo and missed several notes. Emily recognized every mistake, but she didn't feel superior. She simply wished she could play with that kind of confidence, not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted to express herself without fear. When the list of selected performers was finally hung on the bulletin board, students crowded around it. The room erupted with cheers from those whose names were listed and disappointment from those who were not. Emily didn't bother checking. She already knew her name wouldn't be there. She walked past the board, heading toward the library, when a classmate stopped her. "Hey, you didn't try out, did you?" the girl asked. Emily shook her head. "Good choice," the girl replied casually. "It would have been too much pressure for someone like you." Someone like you, those words stayed with Emily all day. They were not spoken with anger or cruelty, but they hurt anyway. They reminded her of her place. Quiet, unnoticed, forgettable. That night she practiced with more emotion than usual. Her fingers moved quickly and confidently, driven by frustration, sadness, and longing. She imagined playing in front of a silent crowd, their eyes wide with surprise, their laughter replaced by admiration. She imagined finishing her performance and hearing applause, not because she needed validation, but because people finally recognized that there was something more inside her than silence. For the first time, she wondered what would happen if she did something unexpected. Not loud or flashy, just brave. She didn't want fame or trophies or praise. She wanted a moment where she could stop being invisible. But the fear didn't go away. It was still there, whispering that she would fail, that she would embarrass herself, that everyone would laugh. Still, a tiny seed of possibility had been planted. A thought that refused to disappear no matter how much she tried. What if she tried? What if she stepped forward just once? She didn't know it yet, but that small question was about to change everything. When the morning of rehearsal arrived, the school auditorium was louder than usual. Students rushed across the stage, tuning instruments, practicing lines, and arguing about who would sit in the front row. The conductor, Mr. Harris, stood in the middle of the chaos, trying his best to organize everyone. He was a strict man with a serious face, but he respected talent deeply, especially when he saw confidence in it. Emily stood at the entrance of the auditorium, holding her books close to her chest. She had not planned to come, she had no reason to be there. She wasn't on the performer list, she hadn't auditioned, and she wasn't known as a musician. But something inside her had pushed her to walk through those doors. It wasn't ambition, just a small, quiet hope she didn't understand yet. She watched from the shadows as students practiced loudly. Some played instruments like they were fighting a battle. Others joked around and pretended they were famous musicians already. There was no room in that space for someone silent like her, or so she believed. Mr. Harris clapped his hands loudly to get everyone's attention. He called out names, and students took turns performing short segments of their pieces. Some played beautifully, others made mistakes, but they all did so proudly, as if they were sure their effort was important. Emily watched in silence, her heart beating too quickly for someone who wasn't participating. She knew she could play better than most of them. Not louder, not flashier, but cleaner, more emotional, more controlled. Yet she stood frozen, because skill means nothing if fear keeps it hidden. As the rehearsal continued, a group of students noticed her standing near the doorway. One of them, a tall boy named Logan, smirked and whispered something to his friend. They both looked at Emily and laughed quietly as if her presence was a joke. "Are you lost or something?" Logan said loudly enough for others to hear. Emily shook her head, embarrassed. "She probably came to watch the real musicians perform," another girl said dramatically, flipping her hair. Their comments stung, but not because they were cruel, it was because she feared they were true. She wanted to leave, to run away before she cried, but something inside her stopped her. A voice whispered that she didn't have to run this time. That voice wasn't loud, but it was stubborn. When the conductor announced a break, the auditorium slowly emptied. Students went outside to talk and drink water. Emily stayed where she was, staring at the stage. The grand piano was there, shining under the stage lights. It looked both intimidating and inviting. She had never played on a piano that big, that expensive. She could almost hear music in her mind, even though the room was silent. Mr. Harris noticed her standing alone. "You're not a performer," he said, not with rudeness but confusion. Emily shook her head, unable to speak. "Then why are you here?" She swallowed hard, she wasn't sure herself. But after a long pause, she whispered, I want to play." What? The conductor raised an eyebrow. He had never heard her speak more than a sentence. She was invisible to him, like a shadow passing in the hall. "You want to play on stage?" he asked. Emily nodded, even though her knees were shaking. Her voice was almost too soft to hear. "Yes, please." He looked at her carefully, trying to understand. He valued bravery, even quiet bravery. Still, he was doubtful. The concert was not a talent show for beginners. It was serious, demanding, professional. "Do you have experience with classical piano?" he asked. Emily nodded again. "Have you performed before?" She shook her head, ashamed. He sighed, torn between rules and curiosity. "You understand that rehearsal is not a casual activity. You can't just decide to perform because you feel like it." Emily lowered her eyes. She thought that was the end of the conversation. But then she surprised herself. She said without looking up, "I've practiced for years, I want to try." The conductor had heard 1,000 confident speeches from loud students, but something about the shaky courage in her voice felt different. He hesitated. He knew the other students would criticize him if he allowed someone unprepared to perform. They valued the competition too much to welcome an unknown girl. But he also wondered for a moment if there was something special hidden behind her quietness. Before he could decide, a group of students walked back in and overheard the last sentence. "Wait, she wants to perform." Logan laughed loudly. "She, seriously." Others joined in with giggles. The conductor didn't stop them. Maybe he wanted to see how she would react. Emily felt her face burn, her heart pound painfully, but she didn't run. Another boy said, "If she's so good, why hasn't anyone seen her play?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't have the strength to defend herself. The conductor finally intervened. "Enough." The room fell quiet. He turned back to Emily. "If you want to perform, you must prove you're ready. The stage isn't for everyone." What? Emily looked at the piano. She could feel her hands shaking, her throat tightening. Every instinct told her to back away, apologize, and hide again. But she whispered, almost breathless, "I'll try." What? The conductor nodded slowly, still unsure whether this was bravery or foolishness. "Then you'll play after the next performer," he said. Emily didn't smile. She didn't feel proud. She felt terrified. But for the first time in her life, she had asked for something she wanted. And she didn't know it yet, but that small, trembling request would be the first step toward shocking everyone who thought she was invisible. When the students returned from their break, the atmosphere inside the auditorium felt even louder and more competitive than before. People talked about their pieces, corrected each other, and made bold predictions about who would get the loudest applause on the night of the concert. No one cared about the shy girl standing near the edge of the stage, trying her best to breathe normally. Emily's turn was not immediate, which made everything worse. She had to stand there and watch more confident students perform before her. Each performance made her anxiety grow, as if every loud note from another player crushed her courage a little more. She wrapped her hands around her fingers to stop them from shaking. Meanwhile, the students who overheard her conversation with the conductor could not stop talking about it. Logan, the loudest one in the group, kept whispering things like, "She is actually going to play. I didn't know she could even talk, forget playing." Or, "Maybe she thinks she's a musical genius who's been hiding her powers." Some students laughed, others pretended to play along, but many simply watched her with amused curiosity. Emily was used to being ignored, but she wasn't used to being the center of attention, even negative attention. Her heart felt heavy as if it were made of stone. Finally, after several students performed, the conductor looked at her. "You're next," he said. Those two words hit her like a wave and she felt her throat close. Her legs moved toward the stage before her brain could react. She walked slowly, like someone walking into a storm, and sat down at the grand piano. The piano felt huge, almost threatening. Her reflection stared back at her in the polished black surface, reminding her how small she was. The room fell silent, but not because anyone believed in her. It was the kind of silence that existed before a joke, before a spectacle, before entertainment at someone else's expense. Someone whispered just loud enough to be heard, "This is going to be awkward." Emily heard it, and it cut deeper than she expected. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling. She hadn't even begun playing, and already the audience doubted her. The conductor stepped closer. His expression was unreadable. He didn't want to embarrass her, but he also didn't want the rehearsal to turn into chaos. "Whenever you're ready," he said quietly. Those words should have encouraged her, but they only reminded her how unprepared she felt. She knew the music perfectly, but music is not just about memory. It is about heart, and her heart was shaking. Just as she was about to start, Logan and two other boys started laughing again. They tried to hide it behind their hands, but they didn't try very hard. One whispered to the other, "If she messes up, I'm going to record it." Emily heard them, and her vision blurred for a second. She didn't want to cry in front of them. Tears would be worse than mistakes. Another girl rolled her eyes dramatically and said, "Why do shy people always think they have to prove something?" The room wasn't cruel because people hated her. It was cruel because people didn't believe she mattered enough to treat with kindness. The conductor's patience ran out. He raised his voice enough silence. The laughter stopped instantly. Students straightened their backs, suddenly reminded they were part of something serious. The conductor turned to Emily. His tone softened a little. "Focus on the music, don't focus on them." But he didn't know that focusing was impossible when fear lived in her bones. Emily closed her eyes, not to escape her surroundings, but to find her music somewhere inside the darkness. She remembered practicing at home in the quiet living room where nobody watched or judged. She remembered the warm light from the window, the sound of rain tapping against the glass, the peaceful concentration that came naturally. She wished she were there instead of here. The conductor stepped back, giving her space, and said again, "Whenever you're ready." Emily finally pressed the first key, but her finger slipped slightly, producing a weak, uneven sound. A few students covered their mouths, hiding smirks. A wave of terror shot through her, stronger than any she had felt before. Her mind screamed, "Stop now, walk away, save yourself." But her hands moved anyway. She played the opening line of the piece, but her hands were stiff, and the music sounded mechanical, empty. It wasn't the music she practiced, it was the ghost of it. Her anxiety controlled every note. A boy muttered loudly enough for many to hear, "I knew it." Someone else snickered. Emily continued playing, but her heart shrank with every mistake. She could feel the humiliation spreading through her skin, making her wish the floor would open and swallow her whole. The conductor watched silently. He could see the fear, not lack of skill. He knew the difference. He had seen many students choke on stage, talented ones too, but something about this moment bothered him more than usual. He wondered if he had made a mistake, not letting her play but letting others witness her weakest moment. As she continued, a loud thud came from backstage. Someone had dropped a case, intentionally or accidentally, but it made the entire audience turn their heads. That tiny distraction broke Emily's fragile concentration, and she hit two wrong notes in a row. A few students laughed, unable to resist. Her fingers froze, everything inside her collapsed. Her heart didn't just beat fast, it felt shattered. She stopped playing completely. Not because she forgot the notes, but because she felt too small to continue. The conductor stepped forward, ready to say something, maybe to comfort her, maybe to ask her to sit down. But before he could speak, Logan laughed openly and clapped slowly as a joke, saying, "Bravo." Others didn't join him, but they didn't stop him either. Emily didn't cry, but her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She stared at the piano keys, ashamed of even touching them. She stood up quietly, with the kind of silence only broken hearts produce, and walked back toward her seat. She didn't meet anyone's eyes. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She simply sat down, believing that her biggest fear had come true. She had asked for a chance, and everyone had laughed. When the rehearsal ended, most students left the auditorium laughing, talking about their performances, and planning what they would wear on the night of the concert. Nobody talked about Emily's moment except in whispers. They treated it not as an attempt, but as entertainment, something embarrassing that happened then quickly forgotten. Emily walked out slowly, feeling like she was carrying 1,000 pounds in her chest. The hallway seemed longer than usual, and every step felt heavy. She didn't want to go home. She didn't want to face her grandmother. She didn't want anyone asking how rehearsal went. She wished she could disappear, become invisible again, because being noticed had turned into a nightmare. She found an empty bench outside, behind the school building where no one went. She sat down, hugging her knees, staring at the ground. She replayed the moment in her head over and over, the shaky hands, the wrong notes, the laughter, the sarcastic applause. It was torture she couldn't turn off. Her heart whispered, "This is why you were meant to stay quiet. This is why you should never try." She wondered if she had been stupid for thinking she belonged on stage. Maybe she had confused passion with potential. Maybe loving music didn't mean she was good at it. But another thought, small but stubborn, argued back, "You didn't fail because you were bad. You stopped because you were scared." She hated that it was true. At that moment, Mr. Harris, the conductor, walked out of the building. He didn't see her at first. He was carrying sheet music, looking tired from the long day. When he finally noticed her sitting alone, his eyes softened. He walked over, not with the authority of a teacher, but with the quiet concern of someone who understood pain. He sat at the far end of the bench, giving her space. For a while, he didn't speak. He let the silence exist without pressure. Then, gently, he said, "You didn't fail today because you made mistakes." Emily didn't look up. She wiped her eyes quickly, hoping he wouldn't notice. "You failed because you let them take your confidence away." What? His words were not harsh, but they felt like truth, heavier than criticism. Emily whispered, her voice barely audible, "They laughed at me." "Yes, they did," he said softly, "because they don't know you, and because they thought they were better." What? She shook her head. "They are better." He sighed. "Being loud isn't the same as being talented. They perform with volume, you perform with feeling. That difference matters." Emily didn't believe him. She felt small, talentless, hopeless. "I shouldn't have asked to play," she said. He turned toward her slightly. "No, you should have asked earlier in your life." Those words surprised her. She looked at him then, for the first time since rehearsal. He continued, "I've seen many confident performers. Few of them have real heart. You have it, but you're afraid to show it." Emily looked away, ashamed. "I can't play when people watch me." "That's normal," he said. "Even professionals struggle. You think musicians are fearless. They're not. They just learn to play anyway." She didn't answer. The conductor stood up slowly, brushing dust from his coat. "I'm not removing you from the concert," he said. Emily's eyes widened. Shock replaced sadness for a moment. "What?" "You asked to play. I'm giving you a chance to earn it," he said. "You will perform on stage, but only if you're ready. And you will be ready if you practice with courage, not fear." Her heart raced with both excitement and panic. "But what if I mess up again?" "What?" He shrugged lightly. "Then you get up and you keep playing." He paused, then added, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing music over fear." He left her with that thought, walking back into the building, leaving Emily alone with confusing emotions. Part of her felt grateful, part of her felt terrified, and part of her wished he had just said she wasn't allowed to perform. That would have been easier. She could have returned to silence, safe from judgment, safe from humiliation. But now she had responsibility. A chance, a frightening, uncertain, heavy chance. She sat there until the sun began to set. The cold breeze made her shiver, but she didn't move. She thought about what courage meant. She thought about every time she practiced alone, when music made her feel alive. She wondered if she could ever feel that same freedom in front of people. Later that evening, Emily walked home slowly, dragging her feet. When she entered the house, her grandmother immediately noticed something was different, not because Emily was crying, but because her silence felt heavier than usual. "How was rehearsal?" her grandmother asked gently. Emily forced a small smile. It was hard. Her grandmother didn't press for details. She simply placed a warm hand on Emily's shoulder and said, "The hardest moments are the ones that teach us the most." What? Emily nodded, though she didn't understand what lesson she had learned yet. After dinner, she sat at the piano, but she didn't play. She rested her hands on the keys without pressing them. She wondered if music could still feel like home after humiliation. She wondered if she could love something that had hurt her so deeply. Then she closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and slowly began to play. Not loudly, not confidently, but honestly. Every note trembled, not from fear, but from vulnerability. The music was fragile but real. And as her grandmother listened quietly, she realized something important. Emily wasn't defeated, she was wounded, but wounds, unlike fears, can heal. The days leading up to the concert felt different for Emily. They were not peaceful like before, they were full of pressure, expectation, and fear. Every time she sat at the piano, she remembered the laughter, the wrong notes, and the way she froze. Those memories sat in her chest like a heavy stone, but she practiced anyway. She practiced not because she felt brave, but because she felt responsible. The conductor had given her a chance she never expected. He didn't reject her, even after she failed in front of everyone. Instead, he challenged her to try again. And that challenge was louder than her fear. Every afternoon, Emily rushed home, threw her backpack on the floor, and sat at the piano. Her grandmother watched her in silence. She never interrupted, never corrected, never pressured her. She understood that Emily was fighting a quiet war with herself, a war only she could win. Sometimes Emily played beautifully. Sometimes she played terribly. Sometimes she stopped halfway, put her head on her arms, and cried quietly so nobody would hear. But she always wiped her tears and continued, even if the music sounded broken. Her grandmother helped in the only way she knew how, by encouraging her gently. "You don't have to play perfectly," she would say. "You just have to play fully." Emily wanted to believe that, but perfection had become her enemy. Every wrong note felt like a prediction of failure on stage. Every mistake screamed, "You will embarrass yourself again." At school, things were no easier. The students who laughed at her during rehearsal didn't forget. They didn't make fun of her loudly, but they kept watching her with curiosity, as if waiting to see if she would embarrass herself again. Logan, especially, couldn't let go of the memory. Whenever he saw her, he smirked, as if her failure was a personal joke just for him. One afternoon, he passed by her in the hallway and said, "You're still going to play at the concert, right? Can't wait to see the sequel." His friends laughed. Emily didn't answer. She walked away, heart pounding, wishing she could disappear through a wall, but something strange happened. The laughter hurt, but it did not break her the way it did before. She felt hurt, but also stubborn. A small, growing part of her thought, "I want to prove them wrong, not with anger, but with music." Her fear had not disappeared, but her determination was growing quietly, like a flame trying to survive the wind. Mr. Harris noticed the change too. He watched her from a distance during school hours, noticing the way she carried herself differently, not with confidence but with purpose. He gave her extra practice time after school, though she never asked for it. He never raised his voice at her, never rushed her, never compared her to others. He simply corrected her mistakes patiently, as if he believed she could improve. One evening after practice, he said, "Your greatest strength is emotion, use it." Emily didn't fully understand what he meant, until she started playing a sad piece one night at home. She played slowly with heavy hands, letting her sadness flow through the notes. The music was not perfect, but it was honest. And for the first time, she felt something powerful, not confidence, but connection. She realized that music was not about proving anything. It was about expressing what words could not. She didn't need to impress people, she just needed to tell them a story. But even with this new understanding, fear still lived inside her. Every night before bed, she imagined the stage, the audience, the bright lights. She imagined her hands shaking, her heart racing, her fingers slipping. She imagined laughter. Sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night with her heart pounding. She hated that fear controlled her so easily. One night, after a particularly bad practice session, she sat on the floor, hugging her knees. "I can't do it," she whispered. Her grandmother sat next to her, placing a gentle hand on her back. "Then don't do it for them," she said. "Do it for the girl who learned the piano without help. Do it for the girl who practiced every night. Do it for the girl who loves music." "But what if I fail?" Emily whispered. Her grandmother smiled sadly. "Then you fail with courage. Failure with courage is worth more than success without heart." Those words didn't erase Emily's fear, but they shifted it. Instead of running away, she started learning how to live with it. The day of the final rehearsal arrived. Emily walked into the auditorium, heart pounding. Students were excited, confident, loud. She sat quietly, waiting for her turn. She wasn't expecting applause. She wasn't expecting respect. She was just expecting herself to play and not stop halfway. When her name was called, she walked to the piano slowly. People whispered again, some smiled mockingly. Logan elbowed his friend, ready to laugh. Emily sat down, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Her hands trembled. But she didn't stop. She began to play, not with strength but with softness. The music was not perfect. She made small mistakes. But she didn't freeze this time. She continued, letting the music guide her. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't cheer, they simply listened. Because for the first time, Emily didn't play to avoid failure. She played to express something real. She finished softly, let her hands fall from the keys, and stood up without looking at anyone. The room stayed quiet, not mockingly but respectfully. Mr. Harris nodded, not with excitement but with pride. He didn't clap because applause wasn't the point. Emily walked back to her seat, heart heavy but steady. She didn't win anything that day, but she didn't break either. And in her world, that small victory felt enormous. The night of the concert arrived faster than Emily expected. For days, she had been thinking about it, fearing it, imagining it, and trying to prepare for it. But when the actual night finally came, she felt unprepared. No amount of practice could erase the memories of humiliation or the fear that she might fail again in front of everyone. The concert hall was decorated beautifully. Gold lights glowed softly, long velvet curtains hung across the stage, and rows of polished seats filled the large auditorium. Parents, teachers, families, and students took their places, dressed elegantly, talking loudly, excited to enjoy a night of music and talent. Emily stood backstage, holding her hands tightly together to stop them from shaking. She wore a simple dress, not fancy like many others. She didn't care about clothes or appearance. She cared about surviving the night without falling apart. She listened to other performers on stage. They were confident, stylish, loud, and proud. They smiled at the audience, made jokes, and played their pieces with bold energy. The audience clapped often, impressed by their confidence more than their music. But Emily wasn't jealous. She wasn't angry at them, she just felt small, like a shadow among stars. Mr. Harris stood near the curtains, watching the performers. He glanced at Emily occasionally, checking if she was okay. He didn't give her a speech or advice. He knew too many words would only make her more nervous. He simply nodded at her sometimes, as if silently saying, "You're here, that's enough." But Emily didn't feel like it was enough. She felt like a mistake waiting to happen. Logan was backstage too, laughing loudly with his friends. They weren't as cruel as before, but they hadn't changed completely. Logan wasn't a monster. He was just someone who found satisfaction in feeling better than others. When he saw Emily pacing nervously, he smirked. "You ready to entertain us again?" he whispered. Emily didn't respond. She kept her eyes down, staring at her shaking hands. She didn't have the energy to argue. Fear took all her strength. When it was her turn, someone announced her name over the microphone. For a moment, the audience murmured, trying to remember who she was. She wasn't one of the popular performers. She wasn't someone people expected to see. Emily walked slowly toward the stage. Every step felt like stepping into bright, burning sunlight. She felt exposed, vulnerable, fragile. The stage lights blinded her for a moment, and she could barely see the audience. She sat down at the grand piano, feeling the cold surface under her trembling fingers. The conductor stood nearby, giving her a calm but serious look. He didn't smile this time. He didn't want to distract her. He wanted her to find strength within herself, not from him. The hall grew silent. Not excited, not supportive, just silent. Emily knew many people were waiting, perhaps even hoping she would fail again. People love talent, but they love tragedy too. Her heart pounded painfully. She could feel it in her throat, behind her eyes, in her fingertips. Fear whispered, "Run away, stand up, walk off the stage, go home. Nobody will blame you if you disappear." But another voice, weaker but persistent, whispered, "You didn't endure all this just to run now." She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and pressed the first key. The first note echoed through the hall, soft, fragile, uncertain. Her hands trembled, her heart raced. She feared another panic attack was coming, but she continued. The second note, the third, and the fourth followed, flowing slowly into a melody she knew too well. She didn't rush, she didn't push, she let the music lead her. At first, her playing sounded weak, almost delicate to the point of breaking, but then something changed, not in the music but in her. She remembered her grandmother listening quietly, believing in her. She remembered the conductor offering her a chance instead of rejection. She remembered the pain of laughter, the humiliation, the tears, the late-night practices, the moments she almost gave up but didn't. All of it lived inside her music. Her fingers steadied, her breathing slowed, and her back straightened. The melody grew warmer, deeper, more emotional. The hall remained silent, not because they expected a disaster, but because they were hearing something genuine. Emily didn't play like the others, she didn't show off, she didn't pretend to be perfect. She played with vulnerability, honesty, and quiet courage. People listened with interest. Parents paused their small conversations. Students stopped whispering. Teachers leaned forward in their chairs. They didn't know her story, but they could feel her emotion in every note. Even Logan, who had expected a failure he could laugh at, felt confused. He wasn't watching someone pathetic or weak. He was watching someone brave in a way he couldn't understand. Emily reached the final part of the piece, soft, emotional, full of sadness and hope. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't stop. She let the music hold the sadness for her. When the last note faded, the hall stayed silent for one long second, as if nobody wanted to break the fragile beauty of the moment. Then applause came, not explosive, not wild, but warm, sincere, respectful. It wasn't the loudest applause of the night, but it was the realest. Emily stood up slowly. She didn't smile, but her eyes shined with tears she didn't wipe away. She bowed, not gracefully, but honestly. For the first time in her life, applause didn't scare her. It healed her. She left the stage quietly, not seeking praise or attention. She simply walked off, heart full, knowing one truth that mattered more than anything: she did not play to impress. She played to overcome, and she did. After the concert ended, the audience slowly left the hall, talking about the performances they had seen. Most conversations were loud, full of excitement and exaggeration. Some students celebrated their successes, praising themselves for playing confidently, dressing beautifully, or receiving loud applause. For them, the night had been a competition, a stage where they fought for attention. But for Emily, the night felt like something else entirely. It felt like a quiet victory, a private triumph that nobody fully understood except her. She hadn't played perfectly. She hadn't been the best performer. But she had done something she never believed she could do. She played through her fear, and she didn't break. Backstage, she sat alone on a chair, clutching her sheet music. Her hands were still shaking, not from fear anymore, but from relief. Her breathing was uneven, but her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they weren't painful. They were soft and warm, like drops of gratitude. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't hide her face. She just let the tears fall quietly and honestly because she deserved that moment. Mr. Harris approached her slowly. He didn't rush because he knew emotions sometimes needed space to settle. He sat in the chair beside her and waited until she looked up at him. "You did well," he said. Emily let out a weak laugh. "I made mistakes." "Yes, you did," he replied with a calm smile, "but you kept going. That matters more than perfection." She looked away, embarrassed and touched at the same time. No one had ever praised her for trying, only for achieving. And because she rarely tried anything visibly, she rarely received anything at all. After a pause, he added, "You changed tonight. You may not see it yet, but you did." Emily didn't answer. But she felt something deep inside shifting, a small belief that maybe she wasn't weak or invisible or ordinary. Maybe she was stronger than she thought. A few other students walked backstage, some nodded politely at her, others ignored her completely. Almost no one spoke directly to her, but the lack of laughter felt like a gift. After the first rehearsal, people had laughed because they expected failure. Now they were quiet because they didn't know what to expect from her anymore. Even Logan, who had mocked her for days, passed by with no comment. He looked confused, not angry or amused, just confused. For someone who believed confidence was everything, Emily's quiet victory didn't make sense. It didn't fit into his world. And perhaps that in itself was a victory. When Emily left the school that night, she walked slower, not because she was sad, but because she wanted to remember the moment. The cold night air felt fresh and gentle. The streetlights cast soft shadows on the road. She could hear her footsteps echo against the pavement, steady and calm. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. Not because people saw her, but because she finally saw herself. When she reached home, her grandmother was waiting by the door. She didn't ask 1,000 questions. She didn't demand a full report. She simply looked at Emily's face and understood everything. Emily walked into her arms without hesitation. She let herself be held tightly, like a child and like a victor at the same time. They didn't speak for a while, but silence spoke for them. Later, they sat in the living room with a warm cup of tea. Her grandmother finally asked, "How did it feel?" Emily searched for words but couldn't find any. Everything she wanted to say felt too big to explain, so she simply said, "Hard but good." Her grandmother smiled, eyes shiny with pride. "Sometimes the hardest things are the ones worth doing." Emily nodded. She remembered every difficult moment. The laughter, the shaking hands, the heavy fear, the sleepless nights, the practice, the failure, the second chance, and the stage. All of it had shaped her into someone different. Not someone fearless, but someone brave. The next morning at school, people didn't suddenly treat her like a celebrity. They didn't crowd around her or beg for autographs. They didn't tell her she was amazing, but they didn't mock her either. They gave her space, a strange kind of respect built from uncertainty. A few students said nice things quietly. "You played beautifully. You were really brave. I didn't know you could do that." Each compliment felt like a small piece of healing. But Emily didn't chase praise. She didn't need it. She didn't perform to impress anyone. She performed to prove to herself that she was more than fear. During lunch, she walked past the music room. The grand piano stood on the stage, silent and powerful. She imagined herself playing again, maybe not today, maybe not publicly, but someday. The idea didn't scare her anymore. It made her curious. She realized that courage was not something she found once and kept forever. It was something she'd have to choose over and over again. And maybe she would choose it more often now. Weeks later, life returned to normal. Emily still preferred silence over attention. She still walked quietly, sat quietly, lived quietly. But she was different inside. She no longer avoided the spotlight because she feared it. She avoided it because she didn't need it. Her value didn't depend on applause or approval. It existed in her effort, her persistence, her music, and her heart. She would still face fear in life. She would still doubt herself sometimes. She would still worry about failure. But she knew something she hadn't known before. She could face fear and still move forward. Not perfectly, not bravely all the time, but honestly. And for Emily, that was enough. She had requested to play, they had laughed. But she did it anyway, and because she did, she discovered a truth she would carry for the rest of her life. Courage doesn't make fear disappear. Courage is doing the thing that matters even while fear is still there.